How's it going, everybody? After having looked at communication between players in the last two videos, I want to switch over to something that's a bit connected to this. Some players have had it with others, so they solely play against bots. And some of the ping commands do work with bots, but that's not the topic of today's video. I want to talk about possible improvements for bots. Because we all encounter them. People disconnect and people rage quit, so we are left with bots in our matches. So while not everyone chooses to play against them, there's really no way around it. The context of this whole discussion is also very important. Statements like, bots need to behave more like players. Well, that might be true. Ideally, they should behave like players. It's also something similar to, hey Ubisoft, please create the perfect AI for us. Yeah, thanks. Suggestions or even demands here should be within reason. On the other hand, certain bot behavior is completely unnatural and detrimental to match quality, practice, or even enjoyment of that fight. At the same time, it's important to remember that we do have PvAI only players. Some of them might want something completely different out of these matches. And while we have different bot levels that theoretically should scale accordingly, many don't want any strong bots at all, and the request for being able to choose the bot level has often been made. The match reward is valued higher than the match quality in this instance. And as those are opposing goals really, some of my suggested fixes will not be received all that well. But more on that later. What we need to establish first is how do bots even obtain their behavioral patterns? How do they know what they're supposed to do, and why do they do what they do? The only real info we have is a GDC presentation from Ubisoft from 2017. I will link to it in the video description. It's a full hour, so if you want to watch the whole thing, be my guest. I will only quote a few things, just so we have a minimum understanding of how things came to be. In this one, they talk about balancing bots by science and not feeling. When the devs were fighting against bots, they got statements like, this bot feels stronger than the other. But as with every player, that's subjective. So their solution was to let bots fight bots. And they let them fight until they reach a certain win rate. That win rate is predetermined, so they can have different bot levels. We know that we have 3 levels and they do behave differently. That way they were able to adjust them accordingly, and I'm sure there were outliers as well. But yeah, that's what we know really. I'm sure they further refined this, but as this seems to be a time-intensive process, I don't know how often they rerun the whole thing. Because sometimes it feels like bots do learn. We detect different behaviors over many seasons. But as I mentioned before, we just feel like they do. We don't really know. At least I don't think anyone was doing extensive tests here. Correct me if someone did, and please link me to those findings. I'd love to take a look at them. So yeah, bots learn from each other. Meaning if one of them does something weird, the others learn to counter the weird thing. And then when they fight a player that doesn't do that weird thing, nothing makes sense to us. Or the other way around. Defense is easy for a bot, but offense is what makes us facepalm. If certain offense works against a bot, this doesn't mean it will work on a player. The perfect example here is a TND bot. TND bots are incapable of following up the palm strike with a light. They will never do it. The heavy after the palm strike is unparryable, and maybe that trips up other bots, but a player is just confused when the TND either throws a heavy or just doesn't follow it up at all. Guaranteed follow-ups in general seem to be completely hit or miss with bots. They land their bashes, but then either decide to do nothing or the wrong thing. Warmonger bots do this extremely often. If you try to add more damage to a bash, and then the bot does the wrong thing, this just exacerbates the problem even more. I said in the beginning that we cannot expect these bots to behave exactly like humans. It's impossible. But this sort of behavior should not be present in a level 3 bot. While these bots do need to make mistakes when it comes to defense, when they do random nonsense on offense, on guaranteed offense, then it's no longer just a mistake, it's the equivalent of throwing a fight. But let's stick with defense for now, because this is probably the biggest problem and maybe even complaint when fighting bots. Many people use bots to practice a hero, or certain matchups. Back in the day, the attacks of bots didn't even have the same speed as those of players. This took years to fix, but we're finally at the spot where, in theory, you could use bots to practice. How effective that practice is, everyone can decide for themselves, as certain aspects of a matchup can certainly be recreated with a bot, but mileage may vary. When talking about your own offense against bots though, there's probably not much debate to be had. We all know that bots basically input read. If they decide that the next attack will get parried, then this is what's going to happen, and no matter what you do will change this. Bots do not care about the effectiveness of mix-ups. A mix-up that is highly effective even against the best players, a bot does not care. It's just as effective against him as heavy spam. It's impossible to quote-unquote outplay a bot with offense. Things that work on players do not work against bots, and vice versa. You actually tend to build bad habits when you fight bots too much. At the same time, while a bot's defense in 1v1s can be overwhelmingly strong, they tend to not fare too well outnumbered. Some bots can parry externally, others will never do it. So if your character has unblockables, just spamming those while being external will kill a bot easily. We don't know enough about how Ubisoft trains bots in team modes. Team compositions are too numerous to run those tests, and hope to eventually reach a predefined win rate. So I'm sure some of the bot behavior is assigned manually. Some of you in the comments can actually let me know. If you play against bots a lot, there must be certain patterns that you recognize. I know someone on Reddit did write down which bot names had certain behavioral quirks. I'll link it down below as well if I can find it. But in short, the bot's name can tell you some of its patterns. And bots do have patterns. Even so far as to have things like attack directions always be the same each time they throw that combo. Alright, two more things I want to mention that do annoy me. The first, bots stay dead far too long. On one hand, this is great when trying to finish your revive orders. On the other hand, having only 3 people in a match for 30, 40, 50 seconds is not that great. Here we have to look at the convenience of order finishing and actual match results. A bot is supposed to fill in for a player after all, but it's also just a random matchmaking match, so who gives a shit? Still, even if it's irrelevant whether you win or lose, can still be frustrating. But I'd blame orders here, to be honest. It should be something that you finish organically by playing, but players will always try to find the quickest way. Attacker order is the worst offender here, well, that's a topic for another video. And the last point, bots do get stuck sometimes. Citadel Gate defender spawn, the drawbridge outside, some bots get stuck on those chains. Same with minions. In general, bots tend to sometimes need a reboot. The moment they get shoved somewhere they shouldn't be, they just derp about for a solid 10 seconds or so. But yeah, to sum things up, I do think bots should be looked at when it comes to some of these issues. A lot of players simply demand for them to just be fodder so they can finish their orders easily. But that's just the usual gamer entitlement that we should ignore rather than give in to. Bots will never be perfect, but if fighting them would be a less egregious experience, then I think all players would be much happier. Because as I said, we all face them sometimes. Having said all that, hope the video was interesting. Thanks for watching. Latest everybody.